Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's Ukraine War News Update, the second part thereof for the 26th of August 2023. I've already done the hits, losses, strikes and other bits and pieces before moving on to Frontline in this video, and then military aid and then geopolitical topics. But I'm going to add a couple in to what I missed just coming out now. A big fire has broken out in a warehouse at a pyrotechnics warehouse in Kemerovo in the Russian Federation. That's according to the Russian media. Previously, the fire had reached 600 square meters, so this is a pretty sizable fire. Let's see the various videos about that. You can see it is, a pretty big fire going on there. It's being reported quite widely in different media, so that is fairly significant. We talked earlier, or I mentioned earlier, that the FSB has blamed Ukrainian entities, the MOD, Ukrainian MOD, and whatnot, being behind this uptick in Russian fires. Anyway, we're now going to go onto the front line, and I've got so many things to share with you, so I'm not going to do that, and I'm actually quite time constrained today, so I am going to really just dip in to little bits and pieces and then do a robust frontline update next. Now, I've been talking to you the last few days about these different narratives that are being presented, and also about how certain American officials particularly have apparently been saying to the Ukrainians that actually you're not concentrating on the right place. You need to reallocate resources from the east to the south. The south should be your focus. It's all about the land bridge, etc., etc. And I was then saying, well, actually, I think they might be doing a little bit of that because it seems to be a lot quieter in Bakhmut, for example. Well, the Guardian now reports today that British sources are reluctant to say much about the outcome of the meeting at the border. So we've got Admiral Radakin, Sir Tony Radakin, who is quite involved in what's going on because he's allowed to go to Ukraine, whereas the American generals are not. They're prohibited from going to Ukraine for security reasons. The UK hasn't made that decision for our military personnel. So he's going and meeting Zelensky, and he's kind of becoming apparently quite a major component in the strategizing. He's got some experience, 3 tours in Iraq and so on and so forth. Anyway, but the indication from the West is that the strategy has changed as a result of the discussions. Quote, I think you can see they are focusing on the Zaporizhia front. And anecdotally, I would agree with that. Right. I was talking in my previous video about being a little bit more not realistic, I suppose, but more of a realist in terms of understanding that things are tough for the Ukrainians. They are losing troops, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Well, in fact, let's go straight to that now, to be honest. It's probably a good time to bring this in. Right, additional conscription may take place, but in accordance with the norms approved on February the 24th, 2022, Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security Council of Ukraine, has said, despite the appeal of the military command to the President of Ukraine to allow the mobilization of more people for the war, there will be no changes to the mobilization. But it looks like they are going to try and get stuff done. And they Andrew Perpetua was talking about this. He was saying that he's a mapper that I rely on quite a lot, and he has excellent live streams. He was talking with a former soldier in their live stream last night about how the one area that Ukraine needs support the most is in like mobilization, not support, but the one of the biggest areas of concern is continually mobilizing people so that they have troops to replace those that are lost. So places like the Robotyne, the Orikhiv sector and the Velika Novosilka sector, though they have made some gains there, it has come at cost in terms of equipment and troops. Now, the West can help with equipment. One of the other things is also Ukraine need to make their own equipment as well, and they're progressing leaps and bounds to that end, and that's really fantastic, and we will talk a little bit about that soon. But they need troops, so conscription like mobilization of troops is a really important idea, and that they are going to be desperate for boots on the ground to replace those that have been lost. Now, Tatarigami, who is quite a realist as well in terms of like he's obviously very pro-Ukrainian, but is like these are the issues, these are the problems with the army, these are issues here, these are the challenges there. He says, I'll share a few details about Tokmak Robotyne Axis without elaborating details, and I'm going to show you counterclaims to this as well. And I've been saying that the Russians are running low on reserves. They just don't have a strength in depth. He says, situation for the Russians has worsened lately, so it is bad for the Russians in Robotyne. They are frantically trying to prevent a breakthrough, and the claims today are that the Ukrainians have succeeded in a breakthrough. Claims about depleted Russian reserves, reinforcements, and forces for rotation are incorrect. It doesn't really go into much detail other than saying earlier HIMARS was our only long-range weaponry, which was used for targets like HQs, ammo depots, signal nodes. Thanks to our allies, we now can target them with different weaponry, even after Russians move them further. We can target artillery with HIMARS now. So he's saying, like, this is talking about the breakthrough aspect of what he's saying. It is people think that there is a breakthrough when there's not a breakthrough. It depends how you define breakthrough, like breaking through the lines and coming in behind, and that would be a breakthrough. Just moving forward isn't necessarily a breakthrough, but it's going to be so super important. We're going to come on to talk about this in a little while. That actually you don't need to create a land bridge. You just need to get, and I've said this yesterday, you just need to get as far as kind of Tokmak, a little bit further, and then you can put the whole land bridge under some kind of artillery dominance, and that would have really significant effects. But Tatarigami says about the rotation and reserves, not to doom here. I'm not saying that it will necessarily end up the way we want. A, the situation for the Russians has turned quite sour, but B, they have resources which they are extremely likely to deploy, turning the situation. But I have faith in the heroism and bravery of our soldiers. So, he's saying in general, he says, however, reinforcements and reserves I'm mentioning should not be underestimated, as I consider them to be among the most capable. So he doesn't really go into details, but I think he's referring to kind of naval infantry brigades. The Russians do have the ability to tap into some reserves in the area that are really good reserves. That is what Tatarigami is saying. So don't get swept along with they have completely nothing. Now, I still think they don't have strength in depth. I don't think, in general, they do have great reserves to pull on. I think what he's saying is that in the Robotna axis, they do have some people that they can pull on. But then you get other sort of counterclaims like this. The Ukrainians have believed that they managed to break through the most difficult line of defense in the south, and that's according to a Ukrainian commander speaking to Reuters, a commander called Combat, who led his troops into battle near Robotna. Said that his units have passed through the main mined roads. We've heard about like the densest mines have been overcome. The ISW says Ukrainian forces continue counteroffensive operations near Robotna and reportedly advanced as Russian mill bloggers expressed concern over lack of reinforcements and troop rotations in the area. So you've got Russians claiming we haven't got reserves and we don't have troop rotations. And you've got Tatarigami saying, don't be fooled. They do have some really good reserves to pull on, and I expect them to be deployed in Robotna. Make of this what you will. Just don't go full in for the kind of hopium. Like, I really want this to be true, therefore it is true. But Trantilenko then says the operational tempo has, and he's referring to a quote here, the operational tempo has prevented Russian forces from being able to arrest and resupply, with some units not being rotated off the front line for up to 6 months. And he says that's a prescription for Russian collapse. So this is where is Russia today, which is a source, a pro-Ukrainian source saying, Robotna update, our map below shows a disposition of Russian forces near Robotna, the majority of which are subordinate to the 58th Combined Arms Army, which is spread across multiple fronts. The majority of these units have been rendered combat ineffective by Western standards, with a lack of supplies, low morale, high levels of desertion, and overwhelming casualty rates, meaning that units are struggling to maintain a defense in depth. The operational tempo was prevented, blah, blah, blah. So these different narratives. Phillips O'Brien, interesting to see someone as senior as Podolyak, so he's the advisor to the presidential office, saying that Russian lines are beginning to crumble, and then be open about Ukrainian plans to control logistics and supply lines. So Podolyak has said the bottom line, Russian defense lines are beginning to crumble. The Ukrainian army is advancing southward with some success, coming one step closer, some success, so it's not fully going woohoo, coming one step closer to taking fire control of the land corridor to Crimea. So this is what it's going to be about. It's not going to be about getting troops down to Berdyansk or Mariupol or whatever, but it's about getting halfway, I think, and then getting some kind of fire control. The stakes are already clear. All Russian supply lines, including railroads, are at stake. This means one thing, the Russian army is on the verge of losing its strategic positions. Therefore, we can predict doubling of calls for negotiations in the near future. And interestingly, this is happening. and we'll come to this in a little while. So the Russians are now calling for ceasefires, or certain Russian voices and other people are calling for ceasefires. This means one thing: the Russian army is on the verge of losing its strategic positions. We can predict doubling of calls for negotiations in the near future to immediately stop the supply of weapons, and twice as many attempts to demoralize Ukrainian by third parties to make Ukrainians lose faith in their abilities. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to regain what belongs to them. So that's very boyish. And Podolyak continues elsewhere. There are three key false theses that Russia is actively promoting. One, the conflict has reached a stalemate. The offensive has failed. So we're seeing this a lot in Western media as well. Is that coming from the Russians? Is that coming from genuine, like, US military officials and unnamed sources and so on and so forth? Two, it is necessary to immediately move to pseudo diplomacy and freeze the conflict with the cessation of arms supplies to Ukraine. So, exactly what he's just said elsewhere. Three, Russia still has many resources and many people willing to fight. Of course, all of these are dead and have nothing to do with reality. Russia's strength reserve is much smaller, and the Ukrainian offensive is moving towards taking fire control over the entire southern front, which I think is broadly true. All of these theses indicate that only one thing: growing panic among Russian elites, a lack of understanding of what to do, and a catastrophic fear of losing. So you must push it to the end. But it comes down to ammunition, equipment, troops. Yeah, obviously it does, right? But and I would say for the Ukrainians, troops, ammunition, and I still think they do have enough equipment. We haven't seen the challenges. We haven't seen things like Rockamac and all these other kind of APCs and IFVs that we know they have. We're starting to see Leopard 1s turning up in Ukraine, and we'll come to that in a second. So anyway, that's broadly what's going on. People are boyish. Ukraine is smashing through Russian defensive lines in Zaporizhia as we speak. Much fighting remains, but we're approaching what could prove to be a strategic turning point, and so on and so forth. And there you go. So, okay. My final bit of analysis, general analysis, is this: Ukraine's victory is closer than you think, says a US military academy assistant professor. Ukraine needs to advance just 7 to 10 kilometers more to put Russia's east-west supply routes in HIMARS MLRS range. Just what I was saying. Then it's very hard to see how the Russian army can continue to fight. Ukrainians must advance another 10k southward to cover all the terrain between them and the Sea of Azov. Ukraine is now closing in on its goal in several spots along the front line. Once this happens, there is, forgive the use of the old term, a domino effect. Crimea could be supplied only by the Kerch Bridge, whose capacity will likely not be enough to supply both the western part of the front and the civilian population. So that, I think, is a good piece of prediction. Right. The Ukrainians are advancing in Robotna, although Syriac Maps and Geraman think that the Russians have counterattacked and are fighting in the middle of Robotna town, whereas everyone else is sort of arguing that actually they're east of Robotna and advancing on Novopokrovka. There were rumors I was saying yesterday that Novopokrovka has been liberated. I don't think that's at all true, but it's whether they're actually fighting on the edge of it. We know that there's geolocations for them fighting directly to the east of it, which is, I think, interesting. So most of the activity is around Robotna. There, as you can see here, there are the evidence of Leopard 2 A4 tanks fighting in the area. So some of that main equipment is being used, but there's still some equipment that hasn't been used, right? And also we've seen Leopard 1 tanks. I don't know if they're on training grounds or whether they're near the front or whatever, but we have there's imagery of them being active in some way in Ukraine. Right. Velika Novoselka salient, which is the area to the east of Robotna, there appears to be a rotation going on, and the Ukrainians are refitting their brigade that was fighting there, or brigades that don't know exactly who, but they're apparently they're refitting. They run out of stuff, not just really important stuff. There's a really interesting bit of conversation on Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night, where the other guy was talking about how, when you do refits, it's not just about fixing up bits of equipment, getting ammo and stuff like that. You often get like water, food, and ammo supplied to you as you're fighting. Those are your key, but it's all the other stuff you don't get. Oh, this bit's got bent, and that bit just needs a bit of tweaking, and that I can't fire that straight, and it's like all those kind of things will get fixed up in those times. Then you get people who need medicine. They've got like diabetes or a knee condition. He said actually a lot of the Ukrainian fighters are older than you'd expect in, say, the UK armed forces, where your squad is going to be like early 20s or whatever, fit and healthy. Some of these guys are people who have volunteered, who are like working in an office previously, so they'll have health conditions, so on and so forth. All these little things that you need to fix. We need more. We've run out of antiseptic cream or whatever that might not get delivered to the front line in your continual supply runs. But when you go back for refit, all of this stuff is really important. You just give your sprained ankle a chance to repair, and then you get back on with it. So they're doing that in Velika Nova Silka, which is why there's been no changes to the front line there. But in Robotna, it appears that they are going for it still. Right, let's get on to military aid. Hopefully, that gives you at least a flavour of some of the ideas of concerning the front lines. Right, military aid. The Netherlands will transfer all its F-16s to Ukraine, so it's got 42 of them, except for a few that will remain for the training of Ukrainian pilots. So they keep some back, but they'll still be used to train the Ukrainian pilots. So effectively, all of them are going to be used. So breaking, Sweden's defense minister Per Jonsson. So remember yesterday I talked about how the opposition party, the largest party in parliament, were calling for Gripens to be given after accession to NATO. Well, now the defense minister, says that Sweden's government is open to the idea of sending Gripen fighters to Ukraine after joining NATO. So now it looks like everyone's singing off the same song sheet, and that's brilliant. They've got about 100 JS-39 Gripens. Just wondering exactly where the Gripens are going to come from, what variant of the Gripen as well. Staying on Sweden, here's a Swedish 40mm Bofors L70 automatic gun. 36 of these guns were transferred from Lithuania to Ukraine. So good news, and they'll obviously come in handy, right? Okay, Finland announces military aid package worth $101.5 million. Finland has announced 94 million euros in its 18th military package for Ukraine. For operational reasons and to ensure that the aid will safely arrive at its destination. Specific details aren't given out. Now, that's quite normal. Finnish have been like that most of the time with giving stuff to Ukraine. Swiss government is destroying the livelihood of Swiss arms manufacturers, says Trent Tilenko. This has popped up again in a few feeds. The Swiss government would rather let these Leopard 1 tanks rot and get rusty than pass them over to Ukraine for our self-defense and from Russian genocide, says Elena Halushka. For the evil to prevail, it's enough for nice people to just stay aside, being so proud of their neutrality. A scathing attack on Swiss neutrality there when you've got all of these Leopard tanks just sitting there doing absolutely nothing when they could get a second lease of life there. Now, I find this fascinating. The armed forces of Ukraine are saturating the front with iron models of equipment to neutralize Russian Lancets and high-precision projectiles. They're made at the Ukrainian metallurgical plants at Metinvest. Outwardly, they are identical to real combat units. It's not just about making these decoys out of wood, and then actually you can tell that they're wood, and maybe Lancets are starting to learn that. So we have had a number of decoys being hit, but maybe a number of Lancets are deciding not to hit those targets. So now they're making it out of metal, and it still must be cost effective for them to do this rather than use that metal to make an actual real howitzer, or maybe they don't have the designs or whatever. Iron models or mock-ups of Ukrainian radars and howitzers, more than 250 pieces have been transferred to Ukrainian forces and are actively being used on the front line. That is, I think, super cool. Here is a first photo of a Ukrainian Kub. This is a surface-to-air missile system, pretty old school, delivered from Czechia. Czech Republic promised Ukraine 2 Kub batteries. I think, but these are precursor to the book, just Kub backwards. These are fairly old school, but still, super useful, and they need as much air defense as they can get. Right, I mentioned this earlier. This is from Rebar saying, perhaps the reason we have not seen Storm Shadows used a lot. I was thinking that some of their, and this still may be true, some of their stocks were hit in the hit on Staro Konstantinov airbase. We know that one airframe seems to have been blown up in at least one airframe in one of those attacks. So it could be that we haven't seen Storm Shadows because of those attempts on that airbase, but actually it could be that they just run out of them. They've used an absolute ton of these. So Rebar says, we are told that a new shipment of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles has arrived at Staro Konstantinov. We stopped hearing about them in the media because their usage was paused due to the lack of missiles. They are now replenished. He also says over the past few days, 3 or 4 Su-27s have been flying in the skies over the Zaporizhia region, equipped with HARM anti-radiation missiles, their job is to hit as many air defenses assets as possible to allow further use of aviation in an offensive. And we've seen a number of air defense systems of the Russians being taken out, both S-300s in the Kherson region, S-400 obviously taken out by Neptune missile in Crimea, a whole battery potentially, but also a lot of short-range Tunguskas and Osas, I think, well, Tunguskas and Strelas, a lot of Strelas have gone for the Russians in the Zaporizhia front as well. So that could be as a result of some of this aviation activity. Right, here is the Leopard 1 footage I was telling you about. So these are somewhere, though quite where I am not sure. But this indicates that maybe they're not too far off, and you know they might be helping on the front line sometime soon, and that'd be really useful. So talking about those three elements of troops, ammunition, and equipment, I think equipment's the least of the worries. I think there's still enough stuff filtering through. They've got Leopard 1s coming online. They've got Abrams still to come. Remember that 31 Abrams are going to turn up. They're still US is still happy to provide, in kind of dribs and drabs, but enough to keep that support going. You've got Bradleys and Strikers and whatnot that is still I think probably in a pipeline. So yeah, I'm less worried about that. The ammunition is, yeah, the Ukrainians will culminate if they run out of troops or ammunition first. These are the two biggest, I think, concerns. First 1,000 122 mil high explosive projectiles produced by Ukrainian armored vehicles in cooperation, so that's their company, in cooperation with an ammunition holding from Eastern Europe, have been delivered to Ukraine. So 1,000 obviously won't go too far, but brilliant. And they need to be able to indigenously produce these. They need to be self sustaining, or at least they're never going to get to that stage during a war. They need to produce as much as they can, and that also includes larger bits of equipment. We know that they're producing the Bogdanas, self-propelled guns. They're still producing a variant of the T-72 tank, I think it's T-72, and other sort of bits and pieces that can be upscaled with the help of people like Rheinmetall, with the help of Baykar, and all these manufacturers that are wanting to actually set up shop as well in Ukraine. That's super useful. Now, here again, with a few pieces on this indigenous production, Diki Shoshini Wild Hornets is one of the Ukraine's projects that developed mass production of drones during the war. They make up to 500 drones monthly. Depending on funding, drones work in the mode of loitering munition or bomber carrying 2 kilograms of explosives for 10 kilometers. So their ability, and these are tiny little drones as well, to carry 2 kilograms, that's pretty impressive for 10 kilometers. Very, very useful. And the smaller they are, the harder they are to spot, of course. Yeah, this is incredibly useful. And there's been a real development over indigenous drone manufacturers in Ukraine. They've reduced some of the legislation about production. That means it's easier to do and easier for the MOD to procure them. They've got training in place for operators of these drones, and training courses. That's the word. MS. Yeah, so that's really good. Now, S-400 launch in Crimea was destroyed by a new Ukrainian missile, says Danilov. And this is the idea that a Neptune missile fired off a small boat. Some people are saying surely it's not big enough to be able to fire a Neptune missile. I don't know. If it's a new version thereof, then this is significant. The rocket was new. The rocket was absolutely modern. Yes, this is our new product, which proved to be absolutely flawless. Took out that S-400. I don't know if anyone's got the footage below, no, but that S-400 battery was taken out by an indigenously made rocket, and that is significant. The other thing you're seeing lots of S-200s, I mentioned this in the strikes bit, the S-200, formerly an old school surface-to-air missile, is being used like the Russians do with their S-300s. The Russians have thousands and thousands of S-300 missiles, so there's no wonder they're using them in their surface-to-surface capacity. Ukrainians are doing likewise. The only worry is that generally, and we know from the S-300s, that their circle error probable, which means their accuracy is not very good using that mode. And we saw in Taganrog, one of those S-200s, I think it was, take out, land in the middle of the town. And I don't know that that was the intended target. And then we get back to what I've already talked about, which is the challenges of challenges for the Ukrainians and their army in terms of personnel, mobilization, conscription. So although they say things aren't going to change yet, you can imagine they are changing, and they could well be doing just like the Russians are, some form of crypto mobilization, where they are kind of doing mobilization stuff under the radar. Right. Okay. This would have been in my other bit earlier because it's not really geopolitical stuff, but it's interesting, and I've just come across it. So interesting detail on a Prigozhin hit from Moskovsky Kosmolets. That's a media outlet, I think. Two people presenting themselves as potential buyers of the plane for Rusjet. So that's a Russian jet company. Spent an hour on it shortly before its last flight, planting a bomb or sabotaging it? Question mark. There was talk about it was had some last minute repairs. That might have been this that was actually taking place. Some last minute people interested in buying the aircraft. Let's have a look around the aircraft for an hour. And yeah, just leave us. We just want to have a look at this part of the aircraft. Oh, look, it's now got a bomb in it. The two were subsequently named, but neither turns out to work directly for UsJet, and one presented a non-Russian passport. I honestly don't know if it is significant or not, but it's a nice example of the mystery and confusion around the details, says Mark Galliotti. Yeah, certainly very interesting there. Visegrad 24 says Serbia has joined a Crimea platform. I've not heard of the Crimea platform, so I might have to look into that. Format unites 50 plus countries working to find a solution that would return Crimea to its rightful owner, Ukraine. Wow. So Serbia to do that, although someone says below, well, not exactly. Serbia's Minister of Foreign Affairs said that Serbia did not join the Crimean platform, but the Prime Minister, Ana Narbic, did participate in that meeting via video call. However, she did not voice her support, nor did Serbia accept the text of the Crimean platform document because it goes beyond the framework that is acceptable to Belgrade. That sounds, much more plausible. So sometimes you have to watch what, these news kind of very pro-Ukrainian news agencies say. Sometimes it needs to be a little bit more qualifying or just fact checking by them before they release these. So good bit of qualification there. Right, Lukashenko made a statement about Prigozhin, saying, and this is kind of an interesting statement, quote, as for this issue, first of all, my duty does not include providing security to Prigozhin. Second, I've never had a conversation in such a manner. Third, it's important to mention the issue of security was raised by us twice. The first time was when I contacted him by phone while they were moving towards Moscow. I asked Zhenya, do you realize that you could endanger a lot of people's lives, including your own? He, taken in the excitement of fighting, just from the front lines, replied, even if it leads to my death, I am ready. I told him, understood, I'll send you a rope and a bar of soap. But he refused. No, I don't want that outcome. I'll be a hero. That was the nature of our first conversation. The second time he came to see me together with Dmitry Utkin, I warned them both categorically, guys, watch out. Lukashenko claims he never gave security guarantees to Prigozhin. However, he expressed the opposite position in a video recorded 2 months ago, where he kind of did offer security protection. So he's in a bit of a bind there. And as someone says here, and I'd agree with this, given the way he expresses himself, it's obvious that Putin is behind it. There is a sense of guilt on the part of Lukashenko. The feeling you get that Lukashenko didn't want it to end like this for Prigozhin. It feels like a defense speech by Lukashenko. Didn't expect this from him, and I broadly agree with those sentiments. Right, Tim White says, a bulk carrier has left Odessa this morning after being stuck in Ukraine for 18 months. So since the beginning of the war, it's been unable to get out the Black Sea due to blockades and so on and so forth. Primus, Winona Ryder's Big Brown, becomes the second ship to leave Odessa since Russia tried to blockade the port when ending the grain agreement. It's heading for the Black Sea port of Varna in Bulgaria. This is super important. We saw one the other day that was stuck for equally a long amount of time, a Hong Kong flagged ship. Fun fact, I used to live in Hong Kong. That was able to hug the coast and get down past Romania, Bulgaria, and out of the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Straits. And this looks like the second one doing that. And I don't understand why they aren't just all doing it consistently at the moment. interesting that more and more of Putin's strongest backers, such as Orban, are calling for an immediate ceasefire to freeze the war. Right, let's go back to what Podolyak said, which is you will see this happening more and more. You'll see people say we need to freeze the front line. It's necessary to immediately move to pseudo diplomacy and freeze the conflict with cessation of arms to Ukraine. And he says that it just shows a growing panic and the direction of this, where this war is going, basically, and who is going to prevail. The sense that this gives might be a reflection on the present stage of the Russian army. Ukrainians are not calling for a ceasefire. Orban's calling for an immediate freeze to the war. Michael Clark says, reposting just this one as indicative, the less sensational than many others like it. It's the full cycle. Violent men doing 6 months in a vicious war zone with nothing to counter natural PTSD do not become less violent when they are free to go home. In many cases, much worse. So these are the convicts who have been arrested for terrible things. In 2019, Ryzhan Bakiev was sentenced to 24 years in prison for a series of child abductions in Samara. Wagner recruited him from prison to fight in Ukraine. He survived, got pardoned by Putin, and returned to Russia. He was just arrested in Moscow for kidnapping another child. Right? This is not going to end well, and will also cause a lot of resentment from people in these communities, the general public resentment for what has been allowed to happen, and therefore, by extension, resentment of the war in general. This is, in a sense, good news for Ukraine, as in, if you just take a real eagle-eye view of everything and forget about the moral abhorrence of this, then this is good news for Ukraine. It's kind of messing up Russian stability. But on the other hand, it's just horrific. You've let the Russian prison system, it appears, isn't very good at rehabilitation anyway. It's not like these guys are getting rehabilitated to turn into law-abiding citizens that can reintegrate into society. So they're kind of in pretty terrible prison environment anyway. Then they're just sent to the front lines, survive for 6 months, and then you can go free. Job done. These guys do not have the tools to be reintegrated into society. It's just an absolute shocker. Right, I'm going to my last segment. It's a brand new segment. It's a controversial segment called "Look Who the Nazis Are Now." In this bit of news, Tim White says 36 hours ago in Russia, a reporter for Al Jazeera was attacked on the street in St. Petersburg. The assailant demanded 41-year-old Rania Duridi speak Russian during her live report. She was beaten, suffering bruising of the brain, concussion, and is recovering in hospital. Literally.
Don't speak. أعتقد أن هناك مضايقة للزميلة رانيا الموجودة في سان بطرسبرغ حتى تترتب.
So attacked live on camera. I don't. I'm not worried about anything. You're speaking foreign language in my city. Bish bash bosh. It just. Oh my goodness. Yeah. What's going wrong, Russia? Pretty much everything. Okay. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Hopefully that was informative for you. I'm going to go and have a look at the maps and get the Frontline updates sorted. So I'll speak to you soon.